The online auction site eBay launched the e-commerce revolution when it was founded more than 20 years ago. Over the decades, it's drawn in 134 million users, from mom and pop collectors on the hunt for bargains to small business owners. In 2022, users sold almost $74 billion worth of goods through eBay. But last month, buried in an otherwise dull annual financial disclosure, a note on page 105 hinted at a scandal inside the Silicon Valley giant. It refers to an inquiry from the U.S. Attorney about the stalking and harassment of the editor and publisher of an online newsletter at the hands of eBay employees. Tonight, we will introduce you to the couple that was the target of that stalking. They loved eBay so much, they started a publication to help people who sell stuff on the auction site, and then found themselves the focus of a terror campaign.
The story will continue in a moment.
We met Ina and David Steiner in Natick, Massachusetts, a quaint Boston suburb where the couple had enjoyed a quiet life until the summer of 2019. You called it psychological warfare.
It felt like corporate terrorism because we were terrorized, and it was very calculated. It was very vicious.
One of the things that we also learned was what sadistic pleasure these people took in terrorizing us.
The Steiners have been married for more than 30 years and worked together from their home for more than 20. They publish a news website called E-Commerce Bites. David handles the business side of things, and Ina does the reporting. What do you cover? Who's the audience?
We cover industry news. So what I do is I follow what's happening and how it impacts sellers. People would write to us and they would say, hey, I'm having a problem with Amazon, or I'm having a problem with eBay.
So we said, well, let's put up a section where we can just be a conduit. That's all we ever wanted to be, a conduit for sellers to tell their problems, tell their issues, share information.
And give them a voice.
Most of their 600,000 readers are sellers on eBay, Amazon, and Etsy. But the Steiners say e-commerce executives also read Ina's articles closely.
Industry observers would contact us with questions as there were certain things going on. And Wall Street was very interested because these were public companies and they needed to know.
Tell me what happened when you opened your email on the morning of August 8th.
Well, we were getting bombarded with sign-ups to crazy newsletters.
Newsletters the Steiners never signed up for. Sin City Fetish Night, the Satanic Temple, the Communist Party, and dozens of others.
Then somebody started harassing us on Twitter through direct messages.
What were you seeing on Twitter?
Threats.
It was basically shut up or else. And it was as blatant as that.
But much more threatening than that, and so vulgar, we can't show you many of the messages. 3 days later, the Steiners got a strange call.
Somebody left a voicemail for us saying they couldn't fulfill the order for a wet specimen. And David was the one who called, and he said, what is a wet specimen? And it was a pig fetus. That's when my heart sank, because I thought, who might be angry at something I wrote? And I couldn't figure it out. I mean, we were desperately trying to think, who could it be?
Is that when you called the police?
Every step along the way,
that was the first.
We would report it, and when the police drove up to the front door, we had to put on, a rational face. We couldn't show how terrified we were.
After the police officer took the report, he stepped outside and said, "There's a package here." So he waited, and when I opened up the package, it looked like flesh and hair, and I kind of yelled or shrieked.
It was a pig mask from the horror movie Saw. The plot involves a psychopath who tortures his victims. The last thing they see is the mask. I imagine as this is happening, you're not only thinking, who is this person, but what are they going to do next?
Oh, that was the question. What are they going to do next?
Over the next week, someone sent boxes of live cockroaches and spiders to the Steiners. Pornography was sent to their neighbors, but addressed to David. On social media, the Steiners' home was listed as the site of yard sales and sex parties. And then this book about surviving the loss of a spouse, addressed to David, arrived at the Steiners' doorstep.
It was a death threat. and to be followed up a few short days later with a funeral wreath, an expensive funeral wreath, it only confirmed that these people were going to hurt or kill Ina.
You were afraid for her life.
I was terrified I was going to lose her.
Police at first thought it might be a small-town prank. David installed more security cameras at their home. But for 3 weeks, the threats and packages kept coming.
As this is going on, what's it like to be inside your house? When it would get dark out at night, that's when I would really be terrified. You guys started sleeping in separate rooms at one point?
What we wanted to do was to make sure that if someone did break in, that at least one of us could either call the police or escape.
The Steiners were afraid inside their house and afraid to leave it after David noticed a van and later a car following him. He was terrified, but managed to get a photo of the license plate. That broke open the case.
I'm a guy who likes to dig up things. I sometimes don't get the end result, and that's why I rely on smart guys like this.
Natick Detective John Haswell was working the case with Sergeant Jason Sutherland. He ran the license plate of the car that had been following David.
And it came back to a rental agency, and I contacted the rental agency and got the name of the renter, Veronica Zay. I didn't know anything about the Steiners at this point other than what was going on with them. So this was the first time that I called them. I said, are you familiar with the name? And they weren't. And while I was saying that, I think Mrs. Steiner did her own little search and said, oh my God, she works for eBay.
I don't know. I can't describe how flabbergasted we were. eBay? I mean, what was an eBay employee doing in a rental van following David? Did she
It blew her mind.
send all these things? Was it eBay that did this to us? I mean, it was inconceivable.
Sergeant Sutherland tracked Veronica Zay's rental car to the Boston Ritz-Carlton and called her from the lobby.
And I fully expected her to come down and hand me a business card and say, I'm from eBay and we're doing an investigation. And yeah, I drove by the house. We called up to the room and she said she'd be down after she had a conference call. She never showed up.
Zay left town without talking to police, but Detective Haswell had been chasing down another lead. He learned the funeral wreath sent to the Steiners was bought with a gift card from a grocery store in Silicon Valley, not far from eBay headquarters.
Yeah, they're less than 8 miles away, and he was able to get photographs of them purchasing the gift cards, and it was Veronica Zay again.
The FBI took over. 10 months later, the U.S. Attorney in Massachusetts, Andrew Lelling, announced the indictments of 6 employees and contractors from eBay.
The complaint alleges that the victims were targeted because eBay executives were unhappy with the coverage of eBay on the couple's website.
It didn't take us an hour to realize the ramifications of a public company trying to destroy a journalist. They were attacking the First Amendment, freedom of the press. They wanted to destroy Ina and our publication.
Former federal prosecutor Andrew Lelling says the plan to target the Steiners was hatched at eBay.
What was unique about this case is that you had relatively senior management at a Fortune 500 company who thought it was a good idea to launch what can only be described as a campaign of terror, targeting a middle-aged couple in Natick.
Why?
Well, the why is actually harder than it seems.
Investigators learned in April of 2019, eBay's then CEO, Devin Wenig, shared a link to this post Dinah had written about his annual pay. eBay's chief communications officer, Steve Weimer, wrote back, "We're going to crush this lady." About a month later, Wenig, the CEO of eBay, texted, "Take her down." Prosecutors say Steve Weimer later texted eBay security director Jim Baugh, "I want to see ashes, as long as it takes, whatever it takes." Just a few days later, investigators say Baugh set up a meeting with his security staff at eBay's California headquarters, posted a map of Natick on the wall, and then dispatched a team to Boston. 7 people who worked for eBay's safety and security unit, including 2 former cops and a former nanny, all pled guilty to stalking or cyberstalking charges. Senior Security Director Jim Baugh was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Veronica Zay was sentenced to a year of home confinement and probation. But to date, eBay has not been charged with any crimes. The company said in a statement to 60 Minutes, the conduct of the former employees was wrong and it has cooperated fully with the government investigation.
The plan was hatched in eBay's headquarters in a conference room. It was paid for ultimately by eBay. Don't they bear any responsibility for this?
They may, but cases are common where an employee inside a company uses company resources to do wrong. In every one of those cases, it's not necessarily true that the company itself is responsible.
And Lulling says there was not enough evidence to file criminal charges against eBay's top executives, Devin Wenig or Steve Weimer.
But when he says or texts, I want to see ashes, whatever it takes.
People say things like that all the time, especially senior people in companies. It's not the same as I am knowingly joining a criminal conspiracy to cyber stalk a couple in Natick. People use loose talk like that all the time.
Let me ask you something. If you have a dog that is trained to attack, and then you give them the command, take her down, aren't you as responsible for the damage that happens?
It's obvious that it started from the top.
Jaleese McDonough and Rosemary Scapiccio are representing the Steiners in a civil case against eBay and its former executives.
If you're in the C-suite, it's your job to know what your employees are doing. How did you sit back and say you didn't know? Especially when good things were happening and you know, the share prices were increasing. They were all, you know, patting themselves on the back. We did that. But then when something like this happens, they turn around and say, we had no idea. We had no idea this was happening.
We've seen these text messages from Wenig and from Weimer. I was under the impression they turned over all their text messages. That didn't happen?
No. Weimer deleted his text messages. There was a notice that went out to everyone to say, there's this criminal investigation, preserve the evidence. Weimer immediately deletes everything. That's obstruction of justice. If I did that, I'd be sitting in a jail cell somewhere right now.
The current U.S. attorney has said the investigation into eBay is ongoing. Steve Weimer was fired for cause by eBay and now runs the Boys and Girls Clubs of Silicon Valley. He has said his texts were mischaracterized and that he learned of the employee's conduct only after the fact. The former CEO, Devin Wenig, said in a statement to 60 Minutes that he was appalled at what happened, and had he been aware of it at the time, he would have stopped it. Wenig resigned from eBay in September of 2019 with a $57 million exit package.